You know, sometimes we'd jump on Zoom and we'd just talk about Bob for 2 hours and then we'd jump off.
You were already preparing for your role as Bob Marley during the filming of Barbie. Since the roles are really different, I was asking myself how you managed to mentally get out of the role of Ken and switch into the role of Bob Marley.
I didn't really have to get out of the Ken, because I think once I understood how simple he was in his thinking, if he had any thoughts at all, there wasn't much to get out of, to be fair. Yeah, there was no, you know, Barbie was a lot of fun, and it was actually really nice to do Barbie before Bob, just because I knew how intense it was going to be, and I kind of knew how much work was coming, and the preparation for Bob was going to be very, very intense, just with the musical aspect and the language and you know, representing the culture properly and the authenticity. Like, there was going to be a lot. So having a laugh just before was felt like the right thing, you know. So it was nice to have them next to each other.
You also sang in the movie yourself. How was that experience for you?
I loved learning to sing, but because my singing teacher, my friend Figur, is a wonderful person, and we spent as much time talking about Bob as a person as we did singing. You know, sometimes we'd jump on Zoom and we'd just talk about Bob for 2 hours and then we'd jump off. And so she was a real collaborator in a way, you know. We shared a lot of ideas, and Fiora is amazing because she's a very spiritual person as well, I feel, and like Bob, and she had just so many wonderful insights, and she got my confidence up. So she sort of taught me to not be scared of sounding like an idiot.
You have already made a few biopics, such as King Richard, for example. What differences were there in your preparation for Bob Marley?
Yeah, well, you know, King Richard, obviously Will Smith, a major movie star, playing an unknown, you know, playing somebody that's less recognizable. But not a lot of people know Richard Williams unless you know tennis. Everybody knows who Bob Marley is, and so it was trying to find someone that could play an icon. So I had the reverse challenge almost on this movie. And we went on a year-long search to find Kingsley, and really, thankfully for us, in the 11th hour, we found his tape, and I knew from that moment it was possible. Making this film was possible once I saw that we found somebody that could potentially pull it off.
The movie mainly shows Bob Marley as an adult, but through flashbacks, the viewer gets an insight into his childhood. What's interesting about that is that Marley always gets those kind of flashbacks during or right before a concert. Sometimes it even seems that they merge with his presence. And I was asking myself, what is the reason for this visual connection?
Yeah, well, it was known that Bob had visions. You know, apparently he had visions of the shooting before it happened. And so it was, you know, he's a mystical figure, something really interesting. I wanted to lean into that mysticism. I wanted to lean into the poetry of that. And what's the best way to do that was through the music, through the lyrics. What were they trying to tell us? And so that felt like the most organic place to put those visions in the film, was tie it to the music, was to tie it to the musical performances. And, you know, because that's what was driving those particular scenes, without giving too much away for people that didn't see it. It was a way to tie that poetry and those visions and that about Bob into the actual music itself, into his musical performance, so that we know that he was operating on a different consciousness. He wasn't just singing music. Bob was singing from a much deeper place. His struggle, where he came from, poverty, homelessness, abandonment, all those things that triggered, and then he turned it into this beautiful music that we enjoy. And so it was a way to remind the viewer of something else, that he wasn't, when he's looking out at the crowd, maybe he's not just seeing that, he's seeing something else. He's singing from a deeper place. And that was a way for us to connect it in the script. And then obviously through our amazing cinematographer and set design, we were able to hopefully achieve something special.
Without wanting to spoil anything, but the childhood memory changes towards the end of the movie. And I was asking myself, is this meant to connect how Marley makes peace with himself and his past, maybe with Jamaica, or what is the reason behind it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, the one of the final songs in the movie is Redemption's song. And, when he sings that song, Rita says, how long have you, when did you write that? And he says, all my life. All my life he's been writing this particular lyric, and we hear that tune weave throughout the film. The humming is happening throughout the movie. The hum that opens the film, that poetry is from Redemption's song. So it's this one man's quest to redeem himself and really rid himself of the guilt that I think he carried. I think a lot of times when you're poor and you're lonely and you're homeless, you take on that burden like it's your fault. And you carry that weight like the world rejected you or something, but it's not true. And a lot of times it's try to find that. It's this release. And for us, that image that you see of him getting on the horse there is allowing himself to go to be free, to emancipate himself, to allow himself to rid himself of that guilt. Hopefully you feel that in a subconscious way. It's not something that's supposed to be so literal. It's a feeling, it's a mood, it's an energy that he's forgiven himself. He's allowed himself to love, to be loved. He's given us so much joy. And in this moment, hopefully you feel that he's allowing himself that.
In the movie you play Bob Marley's producer, Chris Blackwell. How did you actually prepare for this role?
Well, there's a lot of information out there about Chris Blackwell because, he's been so instrumental in so many massive careers. He's probably one of, if not the biggest music producer of all time, and his roster of talent is insane. Like, Grace Jones and John Martin and Toots and the Maytals and, U2, it just goes on and on and on. So you can find out a lot about the man. And it was a real privilege to sort of dive a little deeper into the world of Bob Marley, which I hadn't really, I knew his music from when I was a teenager. Like everyone, I listened to Legend over and over again. And he was a real soundtrack to my kind of, teenage years. But yeah, then this was a privilege. The great thing about being an actor is you get invitations to dive deep into these worlds which you wouldn't otherwise know about. And trying to find out the kind of more quiet, intimate relationship between Bob and Chris was the challenge. Trying to read in between the lines of all the sort of more academic, drier information and get to grips with who these guys were and how they connected. And so there's a lot of great chats with Neville Garrick, who was on set every day. He was one of Chris's best friends, and he would whisper if I was getting it right, or maybe I needed to be a little bit more loose or a little bit more relaxed or whatever. So, and he was feeding back to Chris. I know, I think this guy's got you. I think you're in good hands. So that was reassuring. That was reassuring for me.
How would you describe Blackwell?
I mean, yeah, I think one thing I assumed was that if you're going to have that much success in the world of A&R and music, like running a label, you're going to have a kind of cutthroat, sort of hard line, business mind to you. And I'm thinking that, I think people do acknowledge that Chris was a brilliant businessman, is a brilliant businessman. He still runs hotels and real estate, etc. So no doubt about it that there was a sort of stern kind of metal to him. But I think what I learned more is that there was a kind of quiet humility, and what I found really interesting was that it's really hard to find photographs of Chris Blackwell throughout the period of his success, because he didn't want to be photographed. He would rather his artists take the attention, he would be in the background, in the shadows, which really meant, it spoke to me in terms of his sort of ego and what he wanted from his career, which really was to launch brilliant musicians. And there's something in his book which really chimed as well, where he says, Bob and I didn't really talk much about life. We talked about the music loads. They geeked out on like tempo and frequency and all that stuff. But when it came to life, they spent a lot of time apparently just sitting in each other's company in silence, which again shows an intimacy and an affection, and a quiet, calm man, someone who is confident to be in silence. I don't know, for me that was a way in for me.
It seemed like you were one of the only ones who didn't speak Jamaican patois. Did you actually have trouble to understand your co-stars during filming? And if so, how did you manage to have conversations with them?
It's a really interesting question. So the way it was scripted, sometimes it was scripted in like put full patois, as in the kind of the sort of phonetics. So it's written in the patois dialect, and then other times it would be written in a more kind of clear in English one. So I was always able to kind of cross look at them side by side and work out what was being said. And yeah, truthfully, there was some of those early scenes in the filming of this. It's you have to adopt a certain ear and tune into patois, because it's more than just a dialect. It is a language in many ways. And so, yeah, but once you spend enough time, because, a lot of our cast members, a lot of the musicians, they are Jamaican, they speak patois and they communicate in that way. And so there was no way you could just sit and, you not understand. You had to tune in. And so it was a real challenge and a pleasure to kind of, over time, realize that I was getting closer and closer to kind of understanding, and by the end I felt much more confident, and being in Jamaica obviously helped massively. So yeah, no, I think I tuned in enough to feel like I could know what was going on, when to speak.
During the preparation phase, you met the real Rita Marley. Was there maybe a special moment for you that you still remember?
When I asked her about Bob for the first time, she lit up like she was a teenager, and it just made me want to hug her, because I thought, gosh, this is so incredible that after all of these years, you still go back to your childhood when thinking of this man. And that's just my interpretation of it. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe she just, I don't know, felt gooey on that day. But I read it as someone who has such a deep love for this person and a deep respect for this human being that it transports them to a special place, which is wonderful. That, and also all the pictures that she laid out for me of her and Bob. She made like a display of the memories of them two, and it was pretty wonderful.
What were the main hurdles during your preparation?
I think anything that would be deemed as hurdles were nipped very quickly. So, my access to information at the very beginning, I was like, okay, I guess I'll start with the generic thing. I'll read the whole of the internet and then watch every single YouTube video and listen to her music and read her book. And then I exhausted that and wanted to meet her. So met her a couple of times, and then I couldn't keep going back because I wasn't physically able to go. And then I thought, oh, okay. Then I was speaking to the children, and I thought, gosh, I'm asking too many questions. Maybe I should, like every single moment I felt like I needed to keep unearthing in different places. So it wasn't so much a hurdle, but it was more that I had a thirst for information that wasn't in a book. I wanted to just feel it through everyone. People who knew her and when she was younger, and members of the band and things like that, who I did meet also. Not hurdles, more just breaking down barriers.
Were you able to identify with your role?
Being of Jamaican heritage, it was really helpful for me to tap into this woman who I recognize through my mom, through aunties of mine, my grandmothers. You know, I recognize her. And actually, Ziggy said something the other day. Well, he said it months ago. Your mum, actually, there's something in your mum that like really reminds me of my mum. And I thought, yeah, there were moments on set where I thought, if in doubt, if I don't know what Rita would do in this moment, then I have my mom to lean on because they're from similar places in Jamaica. So I was spoiled in that way, thankfully.
Talking about set life, is there maybe a special moment during filming that you remember?
Special moments. Being with Kingsley was always a special moment, honestly. I mean, I know I was with him throughout the whole shoot, but like just remembering times when, you know, we'd be on a night shoot or, you know, it would just have been a long day the day before and we'd come in early the next day. It felt like we were a light for each other. And it's quite an emotional experience that we went through because I think spiritually something like this just changes you. It shifts you into a different place as an artist, but also as someone who appreciates other artists. So we got to play two artists as artists ourselves who had a responsibility that we were able to throw away very early on and just focus on what is right for Mrs. Marley, what is right for the family, what does Kingsley think is right for Bob. And in all of those corners, we were there with each other, doing it together, supporting each other. And I like to think that on set we became little Bob and Ritas for each other. I was definitely the nagging wife at one point, like, have you drank water today? Like, did you sleep well yesterday? How are you, really? You know, but it was important that we checked in because this is no joke. This is real stuff and real people.
Which biopic role would appeal to you as well?
There are a couple. I'm not sure if I'll speak on them because some of them I've thought and they've been taken already. So I have to leave those alone. But I would love to play someone else from Jamaica. There are some legends that nobody knows. Well, we know as a culture, but, you know, the masses don't. And I think it would be a great highlight as to like Jamaica's journey and women in the place, the era that I'm thinking of. It would be great to highlight that so that everyone can learn about the greatness has come from Jamaica because there's so much. So there's a few. Give me 10 years and I'll see if I can churn out at least one more.